The bells rang. The city had surrendered. The war was over. And she burned it anyway. In a single afternoon, Daenerys Targaryen destroyed the city she had spent 7 seasons fighting to reach. Thousands died. Innocent men, women, children who'd never held a sword. And for millions of viewers watching at home, that was the moment the trial ended. Guilty. But here is the question almost nobody stopped to ask. Did Game of Thrones actually prove its case? Or did it convict Daenerys Targaryen before the evidence was fully presented? Because if the prosecution wanted to prove she was always the Mad Queen, it needed more than one terrible day. It needed a lifetime of proof. Today, we reopen the most controversial case in Game of Thrones history. Was Daenerys Targaryen always the Mad Queen? Or did the show manufacture her guilt? By the end of this video, you will know exactly where the evidence points. Before we begin, one rule. This is not a trial about whether Daenerys committed atrocities. She did. King's Landing burned. Thousands of innocent people died. That is not up for debate. The real question is how she got there. Because for nearly 8 seasons, Daenerys Targaryen was not just another character. She was the liberator, the breaker of chains, the woman who walked into fire and walked out carrying dragons. She freed slaves across an entire continent. She inspired loyalty from people who had every reason to distrust rulers. Millions of viewers didn't just watch her. They believed in her. And then, in 4 episodes, everything changed. She ignored the bells of surrender, burned a city she had come to free, and became one of television's most divisive villains almost overnight. 2 camps formed immediately. The first said the signs were always there. The crucifixions, the Tarly executions, her repeated promise to answer injustice with fire and blood. To this camp, the Mad Queen was never created in Season 8. She had been hiding in plain sight since Season 1. The second camp saw something very different. They said the destination wasn't the problem. The journey was. Daenerys could absolutely become dangerous, but not this quickly. Not after years of careful character building. To them, the final season didn't reveal the Mad Queen. It rushed her into existence. And that is why this debate refuses to die. Because this isn't just about one character. It's about storytelling, about justice, about whether one of television's greatest arcs reached its conclusion before it earned its verdict. So, prosecution first. Because if Daenerys was always destined to become the Mad Queen, the evidence should have been there from the very beginning. Exhibit A. Fire and blood was always there. Every great courtroom case begins with motive. And if the prosecution is right, Daenerys didn't become dangerous in King's Landing. She always was. It just took enough power for everyone else to notice. Long before she had dragons, long before armies, long before anyone called her queen, Daenerys believed one thing with complete certainty. The Iron Throne belonged to her. Not because the people chose her, not because she earned it through service, because she was born into House Targaryen. That belief never truly changed. Throughout the series, she speaks constantly about justice, freedom, breaking chains. But beneath every noble speech, there is a quieter message always present. I will take what is mine. That isn't compromise. That is destiny. And history has shown us, people who believe destiny is on their side rarely accept limits on how far they'll go to claim it. But believing you're destined to rule doesn't make you a tyrant. So where do the true warning signs begin? Exhibit B. Justice or vengeance? After capturing Meereen, Daenerys discovers 163 slave children nailed to mile markers as a warning. Her response is immediate. She orders 163 great masters crucified. No trials, no investigations, no distinction between the guilty and the innocent. Eye for an eye. Fire answered with fire. To many viewers, this felt righteous. These were slave masters, cruel men. But the prosecution asks a different question. Was Daenerys delivering justice or satisfying vengeance? Justice examines individuals. Vengeance punishes groups. And once a ruler treats those two ideas as the same thing, every future decision becomes more dangerous than the last. And this is where almost every Game of Thrones video stops. They point to Meereen, declare the case solved, and move on. The prosecution isn't finished, because the strongest evidence doesn't come from her enemies. It comes from the people who tried to protect her.
Exhibit C. When even her advisors began to fear her. Jorah Mormont, Barristan Selmy, Tyrion Lannister, Varys. Different people, different methods. One shared responsibility: to restrain the queen. Time and again, Daenerys reaches for the quickest solution. Burn the city, destroy the enemy, end resistance with overwhelming force. And almost every time, someone beside her says quietly, no. Jorah urges patience. Barristan reminds her of her father's mistakes. Tyrion argues for diplomacy. Varys fears what unchecked certainty could become. The people who loved her most spent years trying to prevent decisions she believed were completely justified. Why? Not because they doubted her intentions, because they doubted what unchecked certainty could become. And as the series progresses, she begins losing those voices. One by one. Barristan dies. Jorah dies. Missandei is executed. Trust in Tyrion collapses. Varys turns against her. Suddenly, the woman who once listened to her counsel has almost no one left who will challenge her. But the prosecution isn't finished yet.
Exhibit D. The Tarly executions. After defeating the Lannister army, Daenerys offers her prisoners a simple choice: bend the knee or die. Randyll Tarly refuses. So does his son, Dickon. Tyrion pleads: imprison them, send them to the wall, give them time. Daenerys refuses. Drogon steps forward, and in seconds, father and son are burned alive. Supporters argue this was war. Countless rulers in Westeros have executed prisoners who refuse to submit. But the prosecution asks us to notice one specific thing. Daenerys never hesitates. No visible struggle, no search for another path. She believes her judgment is correct. Therefore, the sentence is final. Fire becomes law. And once fire becomes law, how long before an entire city receives the same verdict? The prosecution has made its case. A queen convinced of destiny. A ruler who chose vengeance over restraint. Advisors who feared her instincts. A willingness to answer resistance with dragonfire that only grew over time. Many viewers stopped the trial right here. They returned their verdict. Guilty. But every fair trial has another side, and when the defense rises, this case becomes far more complicated than it first appears.
The defense isn't arguing Daenerys was perfect. She wasn't. The defense isn't arguing King's Landing was justified. It wasn't. The defense is arguing something far more specific, that the prosecution skipped the most important part of the story. Proving someone had the capacity for violence is not the same as proving they reached genocide in the way the show presented it. Counter-argument A, the woman who chose mercy. Throughout the series, Daenerys is repeatedly offered easier paths to victory. Burn cities, rule through fear, take the throne first, and worry about justice later. Yet, again and again, she chooses restraint. In Meereen, she chains her own dragons because innocent children were killed near them. Think about that. Dragons are her greatest strength, her birthright, her most powerful symbol, and she willingly locks them away. Not because anyone forces her to, because she believes protecting innocent lives matters more than her own power. Tyrants rarely imprison their greatest weapon out of guilt, which raises an uncomfortable question for the prosecution. If this woman was always destined to become the Mad Queen, why did the story spend 7 seasons showing her fighting against that exact destiny? Counter-argument B, the world around her was dismantled. One by one, every pillar supporting Daenerys collapses. Sir Barristan, gone. Jorah Mormont, gone. Missandei, executed before her eyes while she stood helpless on the battlements above. 2 of her 3 dragons, dead. Jon Snow, revealed as the true heir to the very throne she crossed an ocean to claim. Tyrion, wrong again and again until she has no reason left to trust his counsel. Varys, secretly working to replace her. And here is what the defense asks the jury to truly consider. She survived all of this before. She lost Khal Drogo. She lost her unborn son, Rhaego. She watched Viserion die and then be raised as a weapon against her. She survived every one of those losses. She kept moving. She crossed the narrow sea. She fought the long night. She saved the living. Therefore, the defense argues this: if every prior loss she ever suffered wasn't enough to break her, what exactly is the show asking us to believe about 4 episodes in Season 8? None of this excuses King's Landing, but it reveals something critical about the show's own logic. Sometimes people don't become different. They become alone. And this is exactly the point where almost every other channel covering this topic gets the story wrong, because we've been arguing about the character when we should have been looking at the writing, and that is what the next round of testimony is about to expose. The prosecution and the defense have both made their case using only what aired on screen, but every real trial eventually calls its expert witnesses, people who were in the room when the verdict was written. Exhibit E, the testimony that never reached the stand. Early production accounts from Season 8 confirm the original scripts included a scene that never made it to air: Daenerys discovering, then losing, a pregnancy by Jon Snow. Call it withheld evidence. Had that scene survived, the jury would have seen her grief made visible. Instead, one of the most significant emotional turns in her entire case file was never entered as evidence at all. Exhibit F, cross-examining the writers themselves. When asked directly how Daenerys, with dragons that can scout entire fleets from the sky, failed to spot Euron's ships waiting in ambush, showrunner David Benioff answered on the record, "Dany kind of forgot about the Iron Fleet." Call this what it is in a courtroom, a witness contradicting his own case. If the most militarily experienced commander in Westeros could simply forget a known threat, the jury has to ask, how many other verdicts in this trial were reached, not by the evidence, but by the ending already decided in advance? Exhibit G, testimony from the author of the case file himself. In January of this year, George R.R. Martin, the man who wrote every page of this record, was asked directly before the Oxford Union whether the books will reach the same verdict. His answer, on the record, "I have said in other places, but I'll just repeat it here. No, the books are not going to end that way. They're not." The author has now testified, under his own name, that this court's verdict may not match the one he's still writing. Exhibit E, F, and G are entered into evidence. The case is ready for its verdict.
If you were sitting on that small council, having heard everything we've just covered, what would your verdict be? Hold on to that answer, because the verdict we're about to deliver may not be the one either side expects. So here is where this case file lands. The prosecution was right about one thing. The warning signs were always there. Daenerys believed deeply in destiny. She viewed compromise as weakness. She answered cruelty with overwhelming force. She demanded loyalty. And when that loyalty disappeared, she increasingly trusted her own judgment above everyone else's. Those are not inventions of Season 8. They are part of her character from the very beginning. The possibility of the Mad Queen always existed. But possibility is not the same as inevitability. Because throughout 7 seasons, we also watched a different Daenerys. The woman who chained her own dragons. The queen who stayed in Meereen for years instead of sailing immediately to her birthright. The ruler who listened to Jorah, to Barristan, to Tyrion, to Missandei. The woman who genuinely wanted to build a better world. Both versions of Daenerys were real. Both existed inside the same person. The story never asked us to choose between them. Until the very end. And that is ultimately where this verdict must land. Did Daenerys possess the capacity to become a tyrant? Yes, the evidence supports that beyond reasonable doubt. But did the television series fully earn the transformation that turned that capacity into reality? That is where the case becomes far less certain. Great tragedies don't work because they surprise us. They work because in hindsight, they feel inevitable. Shakespeare didn't simply tell us Macbeth became a tyrant. He showed us every step, every temptation, every irreversible choice. By the time Macbeth takes the throne, we understand exactly how he arrived. With Daenerys, many viewers accepted the destination. What they questioned was the road. And that is perhaps the greatest tragedy of all. Not that Daenerys became the Mad Queen, but that one of television's most remarkable journeys became permanently shadowed by a debate about whether the story earned the right to ask that of her. Years later, fans aren't only arguing about what she did. They're arguing about whether the story earned the right to ask her to do it. So here is the Westeros Verdict. The prosecution proved that Daenerys Targaryen always carried the seeds of tyranny. The defense proved that those seeds were asked to bloom far faster than the story had spent years planting them. Therefore, this court finds Daenerys Targaryen was not wrongly accused, but she was incompletely prosecuted. The verdict may not have been wrong, but the trial was unfinished. And perhaps that is why, nearly 7 years after the finale, this remains the most contested verdict in the history of Westeros. The Westeros verdict is now entered into record. Case closed. But the court has one more matter to bring before you. Now, it's your turn. If you were sitting on that jury, knowing everything we've covered today, would you have reached the same verdict? Was Daenerys always destined to become the Mad Queen? Or did the story convict her before it finished presenting the evidence? Tell us your verdict in the comments below, because every great trial deserves a jury, and every jury deserves a real debate. Next time, we turn to the man who arguably caused more of this than anyone else in the room. He was supposed to be the smartest player in the game, the one person who could see further ahead than everyone else. A man who survived Joffrey's court, the Battle of Blackwater, his own father's betrayal, and exile across the Narrow Sea. And yet, in the final 3 seasons, every major decision Tyrion Lannister made either failed, backfired, or got someone killed. He advised Daenerys to hold back her dragons. She held back. She lost. He assured her Cersei would honor their agreement. Cersei didn't. He nominated Bran Stark for king, using the words, best story. So the question we are putting on trial next time is this. Was Tyrion Lannister actually a genius? Or did the show just keep telling us he was, while the evidence quietly said something else? That is the next verdict. Subscribe so you're here when we open it. The court is adjourned.